Welcome, everyone. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating explainer on the sweeping, incredibly complex history of humans. We're going to look closely at how every single step in our distant past acted like a giant line of falling dominoes, driven entirely by evolution, ultimately shaping the exact world we live in right now.
So, let's quickly run through our evolutionary roadmap for today. We'll be tracing our steps starting from the dawn of early life, moving through our very first adaptations, the mastery of fire, the agricultural revolution, the rise of modern conflict, and finally wrapping up with our impact on the environment today.
All right, starting with Section 1, the dawn of early life and how single-celled bacteria totally shaped our world. We actually have to kick off our journey long before humans even existed just to see how the stage was set for us.
You know, Earth's history was driven by sheer necessity. Before humans, this planet was completely uninhabitable. It was actually single-celled ocean bacteria that stepped up, converting carbon dioxide into glucose to give Earth its very first oxygen. But, well, it wasn't exactly a peaceful process. Volcanic eruptions and terrifying acid rain practically evicted early marine life, literally forcing them out of the oceans and onto land just to survive. After massive oxygen spikes gave rise to the dinosaurs, a series of natural disasters wiped the slate clean. And that blank slate, that's what finally allowed mammals to thrive and set the stage for us.
That brings us to Section 2, the first human adaptations, or surviving a completely hostile planet. Let's see how all of this builds into the earliest biological ancestors of humanity.
So, long before we were walking around on two legs, our earliest vertebrate ancestors were basically just trying to survive the day. Meet the Haikuichthys. I know, it's a bit of a mouthful, but this tiny little swimmer is considered one of the very first creatures to ever evolve a backbone. From marine creatures adapting legs to walk on land, to evolving these complex skeletal structures, the Haikuichthys is this monumental evolutionary predecessor. It's essentially the starting point that links all the way down the chain to early humans. And this right here represents a massive, game-changing shift. Early humans were the very first species to use higher intellect to outsmart other animals. Think about it. While early creatures were completely at the mercy of their biology, needing to wait millions of years to evolve sharper teeth or thicker hides, humans took a radically different path. We started using our minds. Instead of waiting around for our bodies to evolve natural weapons, we observed, we adapted, we hunted and coordinated packs, and we systematically safeguarded our communities from predators that were, frankly, physically way stronger than us.
Which leads perfectly into Section 3, fire, language, and shelter, the domino effect of human ingenuity. This newfound intellect triggered a chain reaction of innovations that completely separated us from the rest of the animal kingdom.
I absolutely love this progression, because it all started by pure accident. It was essentially the world's first accidental BBQ. Early humans stumbled across animals that had perished in natural forest fires and tasted the roasted meat. Once they realized this provided a massive, easily digestible energy boost, they started intentionally hunting and cooking. And because their brains were suddenly flooded with all these high-quality calories, they gained the extra mental capacity to start expressing complex feelings using bodily gestures. Those gestures, they eventually evolved into deliberate vocal communication. So a random forest fire literally fueled the brainpower required to invent human language. How crazy is that? And this next point solves a pretty fun biological mystery. Ever look in the mirror and wonder why you aren't covered in a thick coat of fur? Well, thanks to our intellect, early humans figured out how to use caves and tree hollows to protect themselves from freezing winters and scorching heat. Because this clever invention of utilizing natural shelter basically overrode our biological need for a fur coat, over hundreds of thousands of years, our thick body hair simply disappeared. Once our ingenuity managed the environment, our biology just caught up.
Now on to Section 4, the agricultural revolution, or solving the problem of preservation. Because as humans became the ultimate hunters, a brand new problem popped up that required a revolutionary solution.
Let me put you in the shoes of our ancestors for a second. Imagine you've just hunted a massive animal, and you have way more meat than your group can possibly eat in a single day. But you don't have a refrigerator. So how do you survive when the extra food inevitably rots? This was a massive bottleneck for early human survival. They could secure tons of calories for a day or two, sure, but saving them for the harsh, lean weeks ahead was practically impossible. The catalyst for the modern world was actually a surprisingly simple realization. Meat spoiled rapidly, causing huge amounts of food waste. But certain naturally growing crops and fruits, they lasted much longer.
Realizing these plants could be safely preserved was the exact spark that birthed the concept of farming. We made a massive transition from living day to day on hunted meat to intentionally growing, harvesting, and saving up for the future.
And farming wasn't just about getting enough calories. It triggered a domino effect that birthed human civilization as we know it. Because humans could finally store food securely, populations absolutely exploded. Having large communities staying in one place required serious organization, which led to the rise of strong leaders. Surplus goods meant we could start bartering with neighboring groups, building essential relationships and early trade routes. When you think about it, economics, politics, and complex culture were essentially born from the simple act of storing a harvest.
Moving into Section 5, Trade, Power, and Conflict. From survival to supremacy. Unfortunately, the accumulation of all these resources introduced a much darker side to human intellect.
This progression takes a pretty grim turn, honestly. The exact same intellect that allowed us to form communities and fend off wild predators started to be turned inward. It started innocently enough, domesticating animals for agricultural labor. But soon after, humans began crafting complex weapons, not just to hunt for food, but to subjugate and exploit one another. Ambitious leaders scaled this up dramatically, capturing entire nations to violently claim their land and resources. Suddenly, the entire focus of human conflict had fundamentally shifted. We were no longer fighting for basic survival, we were fighting for absolute political power.
Which brings us to Section 6, our modern environmental impact. A dangerous turning point. This is the final chapter of our explainer, where our incredible, sweeping historical success story meets our greatest modern crisis.
Talk about a deeply ironic reversal, right? Ancient humans spent millions of years terrified in the dark, constantly fighting just to protect themselves from the overwhelming dangers of wild animals. Today, the script is completely flipped. Modern humans now primarily have to protect ourselves from the destructive forces of other humans. And in our quest for infinite expansion and progress, we're actively destroying the very natural world that nurtured our evolution in the first place. 100 years. Just think about that. That is how long it takes for a majestic tree to grow, to establish roots, and to provide shelter and oxygen. Yet modern humans will thoughtlessly cut down and destroy that exact same 100-year-old tree in a single minute just to build our nations. In all of our rapid scientific and societal progress, we've become incredibly efficient at creation, sure, but dangerously efficient at destruction, clearing entire forests without a second thought for the intricate ecosystems we are wiping off the map.
We know for a fact that plants and the oxygen they provide are the only reason we survived our evolutionary past, and they remain absolutely crucial for our next generation's survival. Yet today, we relentlessly clear these forests, entirely forgetting the tiny ecosystems, the birds, and the creatures that rely on them to exist. We conquered the world with our minds, but here is the ultimate test of our evolution. Will that exact same human intellect be wise enough to save it?